Time I recall crying in front of someone. My dog Toby had gotten sick. One morning, he wasn't moving. My grandfather helped me bury him under the tree in the backyard. When I knelt down to say goodbye, the tears came fast. Big, ugly sobs. My chest heaving. My grandfather looked at me and said, "That's enough now. Be strong. Men don't cry over dogs." So I wiped my face, swallowed the ache, and didn't cry again. Not even when I lost the people who meant the world to me. I was 10 when my best friend Malik died. One bad asthma attack during recess, and the world just stopped. I remember sitting at his funeral in my only black shirt, watching his mom cry so hard she couldn't breathe. I felt it building, the grief, the confusion, the pain, but I kept it all inside. Because I had already learned the lesson: be strong, stay composed, swallow it whole. I never talked about Malik again. I just carried him, like a jagged stone, in my pocket. Sadly, I brought that silence into my 20s like a shield. People called me the rock, the steady one who never rattled. But I wasn't calm, I was just unresolved. I remember one night, my partner was on the living room couch, completely broken. Life had finally pushed her too far, and she was sitting there in the dark, her face in her hands, just needing me to walk those 10 feet and hold her. I should have, but I didn't. I stayed in the kitchen, trying to detach from the situation. I started unloading the dishwasher, focusing on the clink of the plates, doing anything to avoid the heaviness in the next room. When that didn't work, I asked her if she wanted a glass of water. Imagine, that was the best thing I could muster. While she was drowning in tears 10 feet away, she eventually looked over at me, her voice flat and exhausted, and she just said, "I don't need water. I need your presence. How can you be standing right there? And I have never felt more alone in my life." I didn't have an answer. I just kept scrubbing a counter that was already clean. I thought that by staying composed, I was being strong for her. Or was it for me? But nobody wants to lean on a rock that doesn't feel anything. I wasn't being a pillar of strength, I was just being an empty room. And then there was the time my son fell off the swing and scraped his knee. Nothing serious. But he ran to me crying, arms outstretched. And I froze. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know what to do with that kind of pain. I crouched beside him, gave him a pat on the shoulder and said, "You're okay." But he wasn't, and neither was I. It wasn't therapy that cracked me, or a death, or a fight. It was a Tuesday. I was driving home, tired, numb. A song came on, our song. Malik and I used to blast it from his dad's old boombox, riding our bikes around like we ran the whole block. I hadn't heard it in years, but the moment it started playing, I was 10 again, back at his funeral. The images started rolling back of all my grief and disappointments, and that's when it happened. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and let it come. A single tear at first, then another, then 30 years of silence, finally collapsing inside my chest. I cried for Toby, for Malik, for my wife, for my son, for myself. It felt like a cleansing. After that night, things didn't magically get better, but something changed. I started answering honestly when people asked how I was. I told my wife I was sorry, not just for the distance, but for how heavy it must have been to carry the weight of both our hearts for so long. I told my son I loved him, not just with routines, but with presence. And I told him about Malik. I showed him our photo. I played him our song. And in that moment, I saw my friend's eyes and my son's smile for the first time. Malik wasn't a stone in my pocket. He was a story, and I was finally brave enough to tell it. I spent my whole life building a fortress. I thought it was protection, but it was a prison. I used to think tears were a leak in the system, But now I know. They're the rain. They're the only thing that makes the ground soft enough for something new to grow. That day I didn't break. I opened. I realized that the strongest thing a man can do isn't to hold it all in. It's to have the courage to let it out. My life is louder now. It's messier. It's more honest. And for the first time, I actually like the man looking back at me in the mirror. So I'll leave you with this. If you're still holding your breath, let it out. Trust me, the world won't end when you start